UK house prices have been falling for over 12 months, and I'm expecting them to fall further over the next year or two as this develops into a full-blown house price crash. However, there are still many people who believe this crash either won't happen in the first place or it won't be allowed to happen as the government will step in. Now, I can completely understand why they may hold that viewpoint. Ever since the global financial crisis, we've seen central banks and governments intervene in basically capitalist markets to stop them correcting fully. If you're going to have capitalism, you need to have recessions to flush things out and for things to correct properly, and that's what has always happened. However, since the global financial crisis, and including the global financial crisis, central banks and governments refused to let that fully play out. So 2007, 8 and 9 never really played out as fully as they should due to intervention. And the same can be said for what happened during COVID and over the past few years. And potentially they may get involved again as the economic backdrop to the housing market in general for the UK and globally really is very, very fraught at the moment. And no one is quite sure how things are going to play out. But certainly the UK economy, things aren't looking good. So there's every chance the government may intervene again in some way, and this potentially could impact the housing market. But I don't think it's going to be enough regardless of whatever they do. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. As the next year especially, you're going to see a lot of headlines, but I want you to keep in mind that one, a lot of these headlines aren't actually ever going to come to fruition. And two, if they do, they're unlikely to either come in soon enough or to have a big enough impact to counteract what has changed over the past 18 months or so with the UK economy, interest rates, mortgage rates going up and stuff like that. So let's go through this article. This came out yesterday. I'm going to read through the key points, debunk some of these points as well, and just prepare you guys for what is coming over the next year. As what I don't want any of you to happen to any of you is that you get shaken out of your position or your belief based on some sensationalist headline that the government released or a media outlet twist from the government into a fancy headline, which could potentially scare people to make decisions maybe they wouldn't have made otherwise. So let's go through this article. The Alton Statement. Government considers help for first-time buyers. So we've got the Alton Statement due at the end of November. So this suggests, this is in the BBC News, this suggests maybe there's a new scheme that's coming in to help first-time buyers. Yet if we scroll down and read the first paragraph, the government is considering extending its mortgage guarantee scheme as part of measures to help first-time buyers in the upcoming Autumn Statement. So the mortgage guarantee scheme has actually been about for a couple of years already. So that isn't going to move the needle at all. Now, it is considering some other measures, which we'll get to later on in the article, but let's just cover the mortgage guarantee scheme first. It is understood that the Treasury is looking at making a scheme which helps people take out a mortgage with a 5% deposit available for another year. The scheme, first introduced in March 2021 by the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak, was designed to encourage lenders to give mortgages to borrowers with a smaller deposit, which, you know, I think actually a scheme like that is a good idea in a well-balanced housing market. But obviously we know that hasn't been the case for many, many years. So whether it's a good scheme or not, I don't really want to comment too much on that. What I actually want to focus on is what are the stats for this scheme. This scheme's been running for 2 years already. So it's been running from the 19th of April 2021 and up to the end of March 2023, 38,000 mortgages have used this scheme. So, you know, a reasonable number of mortgages, but when you put that into the context of the overall housing market, where we've got, and this is in a quiet month, so in August we had 45,000 mortgages for house purchases. This isn't including remortgaging, that's another 25,000. So 45,000 for house purchases. So if you take their kind of, say we've got 38,000 mortgages they've got here since it's launched. Let's bring up the calculator, do 38,000 divided by 24 months, 1,600 mortgages per month. That isn't really enough to move the needle when you've got the best part of 50,000 transactions when things are quiet, and it was much higher than that over the past couple of years. So this scheme, although it may be helpful for some people, it's not going to have any real impact on the direction of house prices and the overall size of the potential crash that we've been discussing. And if we come down a bit further to talk about the other measures in this package that they're considering, and actually before I read the rest of this article, with a lot of these headlines you're going to see over the next year, you have to put into context where we are in the electoral cycle. So we're probably around about a year or so, or maybe slightly longer from an election. I think the latest they can do it is at the start of 2025. But a lot of the policies that we see announced over the next year are all focused on that election. And we know two things. We know that Labour are massively ahead in the polls, and we know that the Tory party are desperate. And for the past few years, the Tory party are basically governed by leaking policy ideas just like this. They leak ideas to the press then publish it, and then they wait to see the public reaction, and then the government decide whether they actually adopt it as a policy or not. So you're going to see lots of headlines leaked out just to get our reactions, not because they're actually seriously considering them. So it's very important to view all of these articles in that context, that they might just be leaked initially to get your opinion and not actually be adopted as policy. And then if they do get adopted, then many of them will be probably post-election promises. So always keep that in mind as well. And we also know that the Tory party are very unlikely to win the next election. And they've always been the party that housing developers have, I'm trying to find the right word here without getting myself in trouble. They've always donated to the Tory party to try and encourage the Tory party, to lobby them, shall we say, to make decisions that are favourable for housing developers. And we can see this in this chart here. These are donations to each party over the past 13 years or so. The blue line, this is in millions, by the way, on the left-hand side. The blue line, this is how much has been donated to the Conservative Party. And the red line, that's how much has been donated to the Labour Party. So we know that housing developers don't generally donate to the Labour Party. They're obviously funded from the unions. So is it likely that Labour are going to introduce a policy that's going to support the housing developers when they're not actually receiving any funding from them? That's something to keep in mind. So the Tory party, who are probably the ones that are most likely to introduce some sort of policy that's going to put a rocket under the new build market like they did with Help to Buy, they're not going to be the ones making the decision in kind of 12 to 18 months. It's very unlikely they're going to be in power. So view all of these articles in the context of where the electoral, or how the election is likely to play out, and which party is going to be in control and which party donors donate to. But coming back to this article, it is one of a package of measures first reported by the Sunday Times. So they just leaked this to the Sunday Times, otherwise it would be officially announced on the BBC or elsewhere, surely, that the Treasury is examining ahead of the autumn statement to help people get on the property ladder. The department is also reportedly considering a new individual's savings account, or ISA, to encourage potential buyers to save for their first home. Mr Hunt is also considering increasing the £450,000 upper limit, I think that's a typo, that should be £450,000, on house purchases funded by a lifetime ISA, where the government adds 25% to savings aimed at building a deposit. So the lifetime ISA has been about for a while, but again, this doesn't really do anything to the housing market, as you can only put up to £4,000 per year into your lifetime ISA. That's going to take an awful lot of years, even though the government's going to give you a 25% bonus on top. Even if you saved for 10 years and you put 40 grand on there, and then the government gives you 25%, that's 50 grand. Now, that's not even the average 25% deposit on the average house price, which is about £280,000. So again, not going to move the needle. The BBC understands that no decisions have been taken and depend on official forecasts or the health of the public finances. And I think there's also a line somewhere that says the Treasury did not comment on this. So it just purely shows this has been leaked for public reaction. And if we come down to the very bottom, I put Labour here in red. A Labour spokesperson said, after 13 years of failed Conservative government, the dream of home ownership has evaporated for many working people, while millions of mortgage holders are paying the price of last year's kamikaze budget. I agree with the first part, that the Tory party have failed many people that dream of home ownership. I don't believe the kamikaze budget is caused what we're seeing at the moment. That was just a catalyst that sped things up for a little bit, but ultimately I think we'd have been exactly where we are now, regardless of what happened with that budget. With a transformational package of reforms to the planning system to build 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament, and new measures to help first-time buyers get on the housing ladder, it's Labour that is the party of home ownership. Again, even if Labour can do this, even if they can build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years once they get into power, if they get into power, that's not going to do anything that's going to impact the crash we're likely to see over the next 1 to 2 years. And that's what you've got to keep your focus on. That's why most of us are sitting on the sidelines, how things are going to play out over the next 1 to 2 years, not over the next 5 to 10 years, which is where these policies will have an impact if they can actually see them through, which, going by historical promises of what governments are going to do, seems unlikely. But, hopefully they can build 1.5 million homes. And this whole video isn't about Tory versus Labour. I couldn't really care. It's about getting you guys to just see headlines and leaked articles and policy promises for exactly what they are and how likely they are to have a very, very little impact on the housing market. Now, they may announce some amazing package, and if they do, of course, I'll make a video on that. But for now, I'm very, very confident, regardless of what the government does, this crash is going to fully play out. As to how big it is, we'll wait and see, and how long it takes, we have to wait and see. If you want to see my prediction of how big I think the crash will be, I'm going to pop up a video now, and I'll see you guys over there.